welcome to Sound Out. I'm your host, Jesse Hubbard, and this is the second part of a two-part conversation with Father Maximos McIntyre. On the last episode, we talked a lot about the Orthodox Christian Church and how it differs from other religions, as well as his love of heavy metal, and learned a little bit about the man. Very insightful, very interesting episode. This one gets a little bit heavier, a little bit more intense. We're going to dive into the paranormal, the supernatural, ghosts and demons, and as he likes to put it, the diabolical. It's very interesting, and this conversation absolutely left me a little freaked out after the fact, but it's fascinating to hear it from the perspective of somebody who's been there and experienced it. I really enjoyed talking to him about this, and I think you're really going to enjoy this episode as well. Here we go. But I want to take it in a bit of a different direction. Something you touched on earlier, talking a little bit about the paranormal and some of your experiences with that. So I read, I think it maybe was your blog, that you have investigated over, and correct me if I'm wrong, 125 what you call legitimate cases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that mean when you say legitimate cases?
Okay, so through my whole, I guess you could say, if you just want to call it career, from when I was working with the Warrens or John Zaffis, or my own cases as a researcher back then, the early 2000s especially, and now those things I get as a priest, fairly frequently. I would say there's I don't know if you want to call them inquiries or cases. I've received about 1,500, give or take, inquiries about people reaching out, whether it's through email, telephone, things like that. And they claim they have an experience that they want to talk about or something like that. Of those 1,500 or so reports or cases, I've officially worked now on just over 250, because the article is kind of old at this point. So of that 1,500, I only worked on 250 in person or intimately to help bring resolve, either as a researcher or now as a priest. Because a lot of the things, it's either too far away, or the people aren't sincere in getting help, or it just never goes anywhere, or they just fall off the radar, things like that. So I would say now it's just over 250 cases. Some I would say disproved, didn't feel there was much to them. But a lot of them, there was activity, which I could even experience myself when I was there, or we seemed with enough witnesses, enough testimony, and also some maybe some recordings and things at that time that they were legitimate. So I definitely feel I've encountered the real thing from time to time on these cases, if you will.
I feel like I have so many questions about this, and I don't even know where to begin, because this is fascinating to me.
Can I preface it with something?
Absolutely.
I want to preface it with, because I have to be very, very clear about this part. Remember, I'm a different person. I was into psychic investigations in college and into my early 20s, but I did a line in the sand and cut that off, and I'll discuss maybe why I feel it's not something to get involved with. So as a priest, I'm not just saying this because I have to. I'm saying this as having the past as a researcher. I'm not a psychic. I'm not somebody trying to sell a book. I'm not a charlatan. I'm not a ghost hunter. I'm not a parapsychologist. I'm none of this stuff. There's legitimate areas of study. I know a lot of parapsychology nowadays is truly more scientific, but I think people should not meddle in the spirit world with psychics, ghost hunting, any type of conjuring, Ouija boards, tarot cards, looking into that psychic realm. I find it to be extremely dangerous. We don't know what we're navigating, and it's very, very deceptive. And this is what I get, not just because what I learned from the church, but what I've seen on cases or from my past experiences. So I don't condone that type of hobbies and things like that. And I'm not condemning anyone. They like I said, they have free will. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to subscribe to my belief. But I want to say it as a concern, because the only reason why I really talk about this stuff now, there's been a kind of a gap in my discussing this in podcasts. But I want to now, because there's, I think, three main reasons. I want to deter people from messing around in this realm, because it can really come back and bite you. Doesn't necessarily, maybe it won't, but it can. Second, I want people to realize there's help out there for people that are truly having experiences. And third, and this is the most important, is I truly feel that the only true help and rectification in these circumstances is Christ. That's, I truly feel that as a priest and what I've seen in the field. I don't see a lot of the other remedies work, but I saw the remedy of Christ work in many of those cases, which further, makes me believe in the faith, if you will.
And what you said a moment ago about, you said you're not a psychic, you're not trying to sell a book or whatever. That's why I think you are such a valuable source um, for this information to come from, and you're such an interesting person to talk to about it because you have these experiences and they are in your past, and you don't, like you did, you drew a line,
Yep,
and you have nothing to gain from anybody doing these things. Quite the contrary to what you just
exactly.
said. Do not do these things.
Do not do
You
these
know,
things.
and it's because of that outlook that you have is why I think you're the right person to talk about this stuff with people. Um,
And I'm not a hypocrite. I tried, I was never into conjuring. I never did any black arts or anything like that. But I would do things researching, psychic photography or try to obtain recordings via EVP, things like that. And I think that was towing the line enough. And I think there's enough blowback when you even do that stuff. You have to be careful. And I know most people won't agree with that, especially if they're in the ghost hunting field. And I can respect that. Maybe they haven't had an experience. But I've seen, many, self-described paranormal researchers that have reached out to the church for help because they've encountered circumstances, maybe in a historic site or someone's house, a case they were called in to look at, and something, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, attached to them. It made their life a living hell. So I just think it's better to leave the stuff alone because we don't know when we reach out there what's going to respond. One of the best examples I can give you is from an actual case is that something if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back to actually, it's actually on a cassette tape. That's how long ago it is. um, the people having issues, and I can't remember if they brought it into the house through a Ouija board or if it just was random. I can't remember. But anyway, what started to, I guess, started in the dream cycle and then started to manifest was appearing to them as, I guess, a distressed little girl. Okay.
one moment, real quick, if you don't mind. So, what's the dream cycle?
So like they, just I should have said this. So they're having some dreams, and something was coming to them in their dreams,
Okay,
and it was a little girl.
okay.
And then when they started activity in the house, and something appeared, it appeared as like a distressed little girl. And to them, I mean, that pulls on the heartstrings of the mom, the dad, things like this. So now their guard is down, and they've entered into dialogue with this thing. They want to try to communicate with it, and then all hell breaks loose in the house because it wasn't a little girl. It was something diabolical that was trying to play on their emotions to open up that line of communication so they could use their free will to invite it in by communicating with it. And then, that's when the poltergeist activity started and they get scratches and things like this. So my point is, this is the kind of stuff that's out there. You don't know what you're going to communicate with. Chances are nothing's going to respond. So it's kind of a wild goose chase anyways. But this is the type of stuff that could respond, and this is why I speak so against meddling in the psychic realm these days, because you don't know what you're going to encounter and you can't control it, no matter what you think you can do with whatever spells or whatever folk magic. It doesn't work. It's You're going to have to eventually, pay for whatever you've dealt with out there, and it's better left just alone.
So, do you believe that ghosts and demons are real and can communicate with the living, attach themselves to the living?
I would say absolutely yes. I think it's absolutely possible. Um, I think a lot of what I encountered was even the stuff that seemed like ghosty, like it was like a person. Usually, it eventually unmasked itself in a lot of those cases and seemed to be something much darker. I think a lot of what people experience is diabolical. Um, Even in our tradition, we do believe that there are such things as spirits. So there are times, I mean, when the saints visit people or heal them, that's a spirit. We believe that there's even in the lives of the saints, we can read about this where one of the ones I heard that was really, really interesting, there was a man that was let out of prison because essentially a ghost appeared to him, which ended up being basically who he was named after, the saint. I forget which saint it was, and said, like, here's the key, it's over here, get it, and like let yourself out, something like that. So there are times I think God allows that type of activity, but I think it always has to be looked at with great suspicion. And I truly believe there's other stuff to define it too. There's probably more natural explanations. There's, um, I like, it's kind of a corny term, but when they say like residual haunting, almost like something in the environment is playing back again, I think that's totally possible. And that's not a spirit. That's just an environmental thing that's happening. Like a place like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where people have repeated sightings of things that aren't interacting with them, that aren't, the quote unquote dumb ghosts. It's just like they're seeing part of a scene.
Yeah.
There's probably activity like that too that people may interpret as a spirit that maybe it's not. But it's something I really truly feel is absolutely real. And from time to time, I have no doubt that people interact with it or interacts with them. It's whether we want to believe in it or not. I think it's absolutely there.
Do you believe that some people do have abilities that they can communicate, or is that really not possible?
I think we hear about like clairvoyance in the scriptures and things like this. Men will dream dreams, but we have to be so careful once again because it's the psychic realm.
Yeah.
But I do feel yes, yeah,
Some people are more
yes,
sensitive to that than
I
others because you hear
I
people
think
say that.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, more
What
discerning.
yeah. What
Psychic
about
psych Psychics though, I mean, I think this cold reading, there's like a people that can pick up on people more naturally. It's not a psychic ability. There's people that maybe actually. So there's one example. Um, I think this will probably answer your question. There was once a woman that I baptized. So she was baptized in the church as an adult, and she claimed to be, I guess you could say, psychic, had clairaudience, clear visual experiences. Sometimes we see like supposedly see auras around people. That's what she claimed. I don't know if this is true or not. I can't prove it. And what was interesting is after the baptism going forward, most of these abilities disappeared. And I said, wait a minute, that's interesting. And I surmised that maybe a lot of this, because she was so prideful about it and she would flaunt these abilities, it was probably from a diabolical source. And when she fully came to Christ and renounced her old ways, and she was baptized into the waters of the Jordan, so to speak, and came out a new creation in Christ, cleansed, those abilities weren't fully there anymore. So that maybe they were something that was given to her diabolically, and they weren't of good purpose. Like she probably thought they were from the Holy Spirit, the opposite. And they were leading to her demise spiritually because she was prideful and thought she had
wow.
abilities, but she didn't.
Wow.
So I think that's the best example I can give, um, and how we get to be so careful because I have no doubt that some people maybe are more clairvoyant, if you will, or pick up more on things, but other people could cold read. Other people might have a good source of information. Maybe their guardian angel is warning them, but then there's also the diabolical that can influence them through the thoughts. And I think that's what a lot of psychics might be experiencing. I don't know. That's just my personal thought, given on the church literature and seeing what the saints had to say and things. That's the way I interpret it, I guess.
That's fascinating. Um, Let me ask you this. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you think the majority of these sightings are more than just a ghost, or at least in your experiences.
At least in my
Um, in your
experiences,
experiences, so that we're talking something demonic. Yes.
I
Uh,
think so.
do you see? Do they? Is it usually individuals that they attach themselves to, or homes?
I would say the family unit is probably what I've seen the most, or
Oh, okay.
individuals that are oppressed. I don't think a lot of time it's the home. Like if one person moves out, the next person moves in. It's happening. I don't think that's always the case. I mean, I've definitely worked on some cases where that could have been the situation where it does seem more the location. Perhaps I've seen places, especially where there's been occult activity. I know it's very cliche, but it's the truth. I mean, sometimes those things, I think, if it's sectioned off and utilized for those purposes for a prolonged period, there could be something there. But I think it's more individuals that are sometimes oppressed by these things or families that are targeted, typically starting with one person in the family and then usually it can spread from there. I've definitely seen that where, entire families. I've mentioned this on other podcasts where they have to sleep like in the living room on air mattresses together. They don't want to be separate in their own bedrooms because they're getting supposedly attacked, or they even go to the bathroom in pairs, or shower. There's someone in the shower. They pull the curtain and someone's sitting on the toilet to make sure they're not in there alone in the shower. So
And
I've
this
worked
wouldn't
cases
matter
like
where they
that.
went. In this instance,
Doesn't
they could
matter.
go anywhere and this would still happen.
They go to a hotel and they'll still have activity. So it's that we can surmise. All right, it's more targeting the family and it's not the place. Now, as a priest, I look at it differently because if I come in contact with this, obviously with the blessing of the bishop, you don't do this stuff freelance. We're not independent clergy. We work, as ambassadors for the bishop. He ordains and appoints us. So what I would do is if this was truly, say, a dwelling in a family that was being targeted and I got a blessing to do so, there's various prayers and akathist hymns we can do. We could bless the house. There's even some prayers for a building afflicted by evil spirits in our basic prayer guide, our book of needs. There's also other prayers in the Book of Needs, if needed and allowed by the bishop. Certainly the prayers of exorcism that are very ancient in our church. Those could be prayed over an individual. But we do not want to pray those prayers over people that are not possessed. Sometimes the bishop might allow if someone is perhaps like obsessed, there could be something truly going on there. But you have to be very, very careful. And that's where also I have to mention that I'm very, very careful with this stuff because I'm definitely a mental health advocate myself. I have a master's degree in psychology. So, I take that part very seriously as well. So there could be many explanations for what's going on. I've seen where it's clearly seems like it is psychiatric and you have to get the people the help they need, whatever it is. They may need counseling and medication, hospitalization, any type of intercession you can get them medically, you must do in these cases. Sometimes it appears that it is not medical in any stretch of the imagination, and it is paranormal or diabolical, and we have to handle that. Sometimes it's both. It doesn't mean it's either or. It could be both, and that's very messy, getting the medical establishment involved, and then getting the right counselors, and also trying to handle it from a pastoral perspective. Those cases are kind of far and few between, but I have encountered those as well. So you have to be, my thing is, whatever the issue is, you just want to get the person help. It
Yeah.
doesn't always have to be, it's not, everybody thinks a lot of the stuff is like you walk into the house and the furniture's flying around and the person's head spinning around and they're levitating. I mean, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, there's definitely phenomena, but that's pretty rare to see, some of that activity.
Yeah. Is it difficult whenever you are dealing with medical professionals to if it's something that is supernatural or diabolical? Is it difficult for them to get on board with that, or do they? Oh, because like medical professionals seem to see things through a certain lens, right?
Yeah. I know many therapists that I know have come out and they see the benefit of spirituality, whether they believe in it or not, in their patients. So a lot of them would be accommodating to the needs of their patient, and that part of it would be spirituality or other cultural aspects. Um, so I think there are people that are willing. I've seen a little bit more in the psychiatric community. It's a little different as when you start getting to psychology and therapy. There's a spectrum there of belief and how we address these issues and things. But in psychiatry, really the more medical end, they're going to deal more with, the CAT scans and the blood work and the imagery and dealing in the neuroscience department. So that can be very, very difficult because they're not going to disclose records and things like that. And it's very rare pastorally you'd have to go into a circumstance like that. But there are times that people are under that type of care and they are reaching out to you for a potential spiritual issue. So you have to really navigate that very, very carefully.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that would be to if you needed to know more about their background and what they were going through, and having somebody not cooperate and not give you those records whenever they might be pertinent to the situation.
So
Um,
those situations like that, you really have to rely on the family themselves. So whoever is being checked
yeah,
out medically, hopefully they're at that point they're open and honest. Or even, I mean, today, you can even, I mean, if you wanted to actually question them, they can probably access their own medical records anyways with like my chart and all these things. And they can tell you, what medications they're on. And that way you can make sure that they're getting the attention they need from a therapist or whatever it may be, whatever the issue is.
Are there any telltale signs when comparing a case that is psychiatric versus paranormal? Anything that you look for to
Definitely.
differentiate the two?
I think you always have to keep your eyes and ears open. The one for me that kind of stood out, it was kind of curious because I was on the fence with what it was. Because actually, the husband was institutionalized at a psychiatric institution when I was called to go over and bless the house because they were terrified of supposed activity they were having. Now, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, this poor guy, he's been, put into this institution. He's having extreme issues, psychosis. The mom and the children are all freaked out. It's, their life is in havoc right now. I don't know. I don't think this is paranormal. I think they're just really freaked out about the awful things that are going on in their world. So I agreed to go over. I figured pastorally, they weren't parishioners, they weren't even Orthodox, but I'll help anybody I can. And they weren't too far away, so I got in my truck, went over there, and met with them for a little while. Was talking, and I felt they were very, very sincere. And I was going to tell them my spiel at the end was going to be, I don't think there's necessarily something diabolical here, but I will gladly bless your home because we bless our homes in the Orthodox Church every single year after we baptize. I mean, excuse me, after we consecrate the waters for theophany for the holy water for the year, and that blessed feast. So I was going to do that anyways. But before we could kind of finish up our dialogue, they said something the mother did that was kind of took me back and kind of creeped me out a little bit. And this was so strange. Basically, the husband that was in the psychiatric institution many, many miles away, who didn't know, that I was there or I was coming, I guess that day when she went to visit him, told her that a priest was coming to bless the house. So he knew I was going to the house because somebody told him, and he wouldn't digress what that somebody was. So I don't think he's clairvoyant. So through the thoughts, something told him that a priest was coming to bless his home. So to me, that sparked off. All right, I think there's something diabolical going on here. There's demons. I've seen this before. He obviously has psychiatric issues, but obviously there's a spiritual issue too. There's something's influencing him. So I did bless the house, and they did reveal that they did have a Ouija board and they had tarot cards. I mean, little things like that. I took them and I disposed of them per their request. They asked, could they keep in touch, and I said, of course. So that kind of changed my mind on that particular case, where sometimes it's very hard to distinguish or to know, and you don't want to throw a nuclear bomb at the thing if it's not that. But in that moment, when she revealed that to me, I said, "All right, I think this is the real deal. I'm going to
Yeah,
bless this house."
that is creepy. How does one dispose of those tools properly? I've heard, you hear legends when you're a kid. I remember one in particular. My cousin told me they kept burning the Ouija board and it kept reappearing in the room. So I mean,
Okay,
is there a I don't know if that's true or not, but you know how it
I
is. You hear all the
honestly,
stories.
honestly, I don't know. I've heard, and this is more like in the ghost community. Don't burn it because then whatever's attached to it goes back to where it came from and will attach to that person or to yourself because you destroyed it. Some people will say, it doesn't. There's all kinds of views. Throw it in a body of water, bury it. Some people say burn it anyways. I do have my, I throw a generous amount of holy water on the item, and I do have a place where I've disposed of these things. So hopefully no one will find them. In 200 years when they're doing a dig, they'll find like the Father Maximus Ouija board, tarot card, occult things that people give me that I don't
That
want in
is
my
that
house.
will you talk about creeping somebody out. They find all that stuff 200 years from
Hopefully,
now.
at least today's Ouija boards are all that particle board nonsense and cardboard, so hopefully they'll rot away in the earth over time.
Does it make a difference whether it is the Parker Brothers version of the Ouija board or like one that's crafted by witches from centuries ago.
I think it's more, it's not necessarily the device, it's the intention and what you're doing. So you could even take, back in the day, they'd take and put letters on a table and use a glass. It has
Okay.
nothing to do, I think, with, I mean, I suppose things could maybe, there could be energy associated with that item if it's used a lot. People might say that, just like we have blessed objects that are holy, I'm sure there's objects that maybe that are cursed. Um, but I think for the most part, it's not necessarily the means that you're doing. It's more what you're trying to do, your free will, and if you are reaching into that world, it could reach back.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. I want to ask you about why an entity would choose to attach itself to someone in particular or a family. How does is there any rhyme or reason to that you have um, found to be kind of a tried and true practice?
I think for the most part, in our understanding in the Orthodox Church of demonology, and we see that, of course, Satan and his minions are jealous of humankind. They're fallen. They cannot be redeemed because they made their choice in full knowledge. So they hate mankind. They wish to drag us down. They wish to reduce us to a bestial state, to a state of hate and everything, like everything they are, the opposite of the virtues. So I think they can certainly afflict people. Um, it's not necessarily even through occult practices. I don't want to keep pointing in that direction, but that is certainly one way. But it's even just perhaps the way we live our lives. If we're a narcissistic person and hateful and spiteful, or we have maybe our own faults and we're not working on them. If we're filled with anger, with lust, all those things we discussed before, um, that's going to probably give them access to us in some way because they're going to relish in that activity and they're going to see that activity and tempt us even more in that activity, probably mostly in the realm of thoughts. We have a long tradition about thoughts in the Orthodox Church, the so-called logismy, and that's what a lot of people battle in prayer. It's the battling the thoughts. It's thoughts from yourself, thoughts that are generated through your senses, externally from other things, whether they're demons or they're angels. So, I think that they really want to latch on and reduce a person to a bestial state to make them almost diabolical instead of making them in Christ, the being of light, a being of love. So they're just trying to drag humanity down with itself because their time is short. Eventually, they're not going to have any more dominion here on this earth at the end of time.
What would the gateway be if not through practicing something to do with the occult? How would they enter this realm? How did they get
I,
here?
I think it's probably just the sinful nature of man. If we're not working on constantly battling our passions, our sins, we're basically aligning ourselves with darkness. Like when we pray and we seek communion with God, if we're confessing our sins, if we're receiving Holy Communion, we're doing these things, we're living the gospel, we're loving others, we're feeding the hungry, the demons will still attack you because they want to veer you off course, but they may not be so ensnared in you because you're doing the work that you're supposed to do. Where they're going to relish and drag down, I think, someone who's already kind of being dragged through the mud, who's having a hard time, who's maybe relishing in their lifestyle, their sins, and they don't want to turn from their old ways. They're going to be more bogged down by that oppressive spirit. And that's not to say, like I said, those that are striving for righteousness, they're going to be tempted till their last breath as well. But hopefully they'll be more liberated, if you will, because they're constantly, having that open dialogue and communion with God, receiving the grace of God, the energy of God through the holy mysteries of the church and these things. So there's more of, I guess you say, a protection there because they're aiming towards sanctification instead of having their soul desecrated.
Is it possible that someone who is giving into their sins and does open that pathway up for something to come in contact with them, do they it is do they always attach, or is it just like sometimes they come in contact and it's not necessary to have an exorcism or something like that, and then they go their
I
own way?
think I think that's what most people experience. I mean,
Yeah.
I would argue that every single person that ever comes to existence, at least in the realm of thoughts, is going to tangle with the demonic on occasion. Um,
Interesting.
so I have no doubt that that's possible. This is it's very complex to know for sure,
Sure.
but it's really like a case by case basis. But I think that things do peck away at people. It's not necessarily they're there all the time; they're attached. I think it's the kind of that back and forth temptation that we're going to receive anyways. But some people are getting it a little more brutally than others for one reason or another. Oftentimes we're being tested. That could be another thing, maybe to help us grow in our spirituality. We need these tests from time to time. If we didn't open ourselves up to it, maybe we have some part of ourself that needs to be healed, and we do have some dark, we'll call it like a sinful secret, and we were just afraid to acknowledge it, or get therapy for it, or go to confession, or get help. And that's what it's maybe latching on and pecking away at, or that's where it tempts us the most. Each person's struggle is going to be different, but the remedy is always the same. I really feel the remedy is the church and the mysteries that it has that are the healing to the soul, to all people that will, partake of it.
What would you say to someone that's listening to this or that hears you talk about this that wonders, that questions, why would God allow this in this world at all?
And this is always a tough question, and it really comes down to free will. Um, let's just face it, if we were just commanded and we were robotic, there's no free will there. We'd just be puppets. But with free will, obviously you and I know, because we're men in the world, we can do what we want. And there's going to be consequences, either positive or negative, for what we do. And that's the same thing I would say in the angelic realm. And the demons obviously made their choice, and then the angelic hosts made theirs, and they stayed with the divine. And that cuts through the human heart directly. We have that ability to pick and choose what we're going to align ourselves with. It doesn't mean we're going to fall. Just because we align ourselves with God doesn't mean we're not sinful. We're not going to have a cross to bear. We're not going to have temptations. But if at least we align ourselves with God, we're on that road, that very tough, rocky road, to becoming whole, becoming truly human, what it means to be human. Not what the world tells us, but being truly human and alive in Christ, in God. And that's what makes us truly a being of light and love, and a beacon of the divine in one way, is by choosing that. Where if we choose to be self-indulgent in our passions, if we hit the bottle a little hard and we're going to keep hitting it, if we're doing things a little shady and we keep going down that road, we're leading ourselves down, away from what's healthy and wholesome to the development of our very soul. We're leading our, we're taking that spiritual cancer and letting it grow instead of extinguishing it in the light of God.
Do you touch on this a little bit, and maybe you already answered this, um, but I'll ask you a little bit more directly, I guess. Whenever there is a situation of something demonic or diabolical and that's affecting someone or attaching to someone, um, do you believe that in any situation the church is equipped to handle that?
I think so. It's the remedy for all maladies, spiritual, physical, mental. The healing is in Christ, and that spiritual healing can only really come through Christ, in my opinion. The fullness of that, and that love and mercy that is given through that healing. It's like we see in the Gospels. He one of the first things he did was heal someone that had a demonic affliction. We see that throughout the Gospels, and he goes, go and sin no more, and come and follow me, like words like that. He's the liberator. He wishes people to follow him because he is the way of, salvation. It's the only way really to put it. It's sanctification, of being like him. And so if we are healed of those things, we take heed of that and follow him, then there's nothing really to worry about, even if the demons are pecking at us all the time. But it's really important to realize that, that is, I'm just convinced that it's the way. I know I'll be mocked for it from a lot of people thinking, it's a hard-nosed way to look at it and not being very ecumenical. But, I truly feel that the promises that he laid out in the gospel that are passed down through the church are true. And one of the first things he did was stomp on the demons. We just celebrated our Pascha or Easter just 1 week after Western Easter. Ours was different this year. They don't always coincide. And that is it is our, truly our chief holy day, if you will, because Christ tramples on death, the evil one, and the final adversary, which is obviously everything that encapsulates. This is death, the whole eternal thing. So that's what the real mystery of Holy Week is trampling on sin, sickness, death, and obliterating it in Christ. And by following him, communing in him, we were also healed of these things. So our journey is similar. So we will also be sanctified. We will also follow him into the heavenly kingdom. That's, I know obviously people kind of joke and think that's kind of a goofy thing because of the imagery we see and the artwork and the paintings. We don't even know what it is. It's something so mystical that we don't know what it is. It's not, us flying around on clouds with a harp. It's something, we can't fathom what it is. But I can say this, that the divine liturgy that we celebrate each Sunday and on holy days and other days, that is basically a precursor to eternity. It's a glimpse into the heavenly kingdom because we are communing with each other, with Christ, with the Holy Spirit, with God the Father, with the saints, everybody at the divine liturgy, and we are mystically in the presence of God. We are letting our prayers ascend to him. The angels are there with us, whether we believe it or not. So that is the true, I guess, dance rehearsal for eternity. And we can start to experience that now. Just like we shouldn't be worried about necessarily right now. Well, I have to be careful how I phrase this. We should be worried about our eternal destination, but the point is that it starts now. It's not the afterlife. We start as Christians partaking of the mystical now. We're battling the demons now by being faithful to Christ. We're doing good works. We're doing all these things because we're infused with the Holy Spirit. At least we hope we are. And in doing so, we're adding light and love into this dark world. That's what we have to be focused on. And then when it is our time and we're called, whether that's tomorrow or if that's 50 years from now, we've done the work that we were supposed to do. And it's not earned because we can never do enough to earn our salvation. It's by the love and mercy of God and us being obedient to the gospel that we will be ushered into that kingdom.
Wow. I'm going to take a beat for a minute. That's the dance rehearsal. Yeah.
It's like the dress. I probably should have said dress rehearsal, but dance
No, I know what you
rehearsal, that
mean.
works too.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. That's really what it is. Now, you said there are instances, and you've been very generous with your time, and I thank you. Got a couple more things I want to touch on, and then
Sure.
I will let you enjoy your evening. But you talked a little bit about there are instances where you think that God allows, like the saint to visit somebody or something. What do you think about loved ones communicating with us here in this realm from the afterlife? Is that possible?
I think it's certainly possible, but I'm always very cautious.
Because
Personally,
you
I
don't
would,
know. Yeah.
you don't know. So if you look at kind of different writings of the saints, so if someone was to come back and say, it's totally something random or it's a weird experience, I think you should question it. It's probably of the mind, or it could be something negative. But if there's something very specific, maybe this person comes back, a loved one, and asks for prayers, and they want prayers. I think that could be a possibility that God allowed that. If they are warning maybe somebody, maybe they're going down a road they shouldn't, and no one's getting through to them. It may be in a dream. It certainly could be their mind and their conscience coming to them, but perhaps that is God allowing someone that they recognize to infuse them with this knowledge they need to hear. I certainly feel it's possible, just like the intercession of saints, but always with that air of caution because you don't know what it is. It says we have to test the spirits. I had somebody that had repeated occurrences supposedly. I didn't witness them, but they would confide in me quite a bit. And I told them, I said, "You're seeing consistently something you're describing, a male figure. It's always the same. I don't know if it's human, if it's diabolical, if it's of your mind, but you seem to think it's a true spirit." I said, "Next time it appears to you, if it does, make the sign of the cross and see if it goes away. If it's demonic, chances are it's going to go away when you make the sign of the cross. It's going to flee from that sign, especially where you're a faithful person. For the sake of honesty, he never saw it again, so we couldn't test that out. But that was my advice: is just to be cautious because we don't know. If he had made the sign of the cross and it disappeared, or if you got sulfuric odor, or if something got angry, I would say, all right, that's probably demonic. If it didn't go away and it asked for prayers or something like I mentioned before, maybe we consider it is something okay. Either way, the recourse is prayer. If it's something demonic, pray that it goes away. If it's something, maybe a family member, pray for their soul. The recourse is always prayer in these circumstances.
Right. Sure. Well, that's good advice for anybody listening. Always make the sign of the cross, right?
Make the
Just
sign of
in
the
case
cross.
if you encounter something. Wow. I want to ask you a little bit before I let you go about uh, a little bit more info about your relationship with Ed and Lorraine Warren, if you don't
Sure.
mind. So,
Yeah.
obviously, everybody knows about the Amityville horror, and that took place was in the 70s. I guess it was when it took
I
place.
think it was about 74, 75 probably.
75, yeah, in Amityville, Long Island, right? And
Yes.
and this was the 90s whenever you uh, started a friendship relationship with them.
Especially, yeah, especially 1998 was where I got really involved. I had met them in 96, but it was kind of a slow burn getting in. I wasn't quite sure, and I was kind of navigating that. So yeah, about 98 I got involved with them. First and foremost as a writing relationship. I didn't go out on cases right away. I'd actually written, I guess you could say, like a book proposal for them, a writing proposal, just giving some writing samples and seeing if they had any work I could do, any case write-ups. And I thought maybe more like writing up case files, something like that. I thought it'd be kind of cool, especially where I was an English major at the time and working in journalism in an internship and all that. Um, I had met them a few times, but I didn't know how they were going to respond to this or if they'd even acknowledge it. And they did. They actually invited me down to their home, and I didn't know quite what they were going to talk to me about. But I sat with Ed for a while, and he typed up on his old school typewriter a little book proposal. And he said, I like your writing samples. I think you have a good demeanor about you. Would you like to write our next book? And I was like, okay. I didn't expect that, but that sounds awesome. We, of course, talked more about it, and he gave me my first assignment to write up a sample chapter, which I did. And eventually, through that back and forth, Lorraine called me back down. Maybe it was a few months later, something like that. And they were having some issues where they weren't getting really any writers or submissions for their bi-monthly journal they sent out to all their members. And she asked if I would help write up some of the case files, listen to the cassettes, look at the case files, look at the correspondence and the pictures, things like that, and just write up little news articles. And I said, that's cool, absolutely, I'd love to do that. So I started doing that. And then eventually I started working on some of their cases. And that's where I kind of, the rubber met the road, and I was like, all right, I was curious, like, are all these cases real? Are they embellished? Are they, I really feel they're sincere, but at the same time, what's going on here? And when I get out in the field and I get to see, Warren's cases, John Zaffis cases, a couple other researchers as well, and then probably about 2 years in, started to get some of my own cases, that really solidified, I guess, my understanding of all that. But it really started with the Warrens and John Zaffis, their nephew, Ed
Okay, I was going to
Warren's
ask you
blood
who John
nephew.
Zappa was. I wasn't familiar with that name.
He's a he's a paranormal researcher. He's been, it's going to be 45 years now. He's been doing it. He never believed in it. He thought, his aunt and uncle were making a buck and thought it was good ghost stories. But as a kid, he thought it was all nonsense. And then he got involved and he saw that it was real. And then, he went on to help many, many people. And I've developed an incredible relationship with him. I don't work cases anymore, per se, like as a researcher. The last time I would have done that would be probably 2005-ish, as a researcher. Um, but we still communicate all the time. He's very close to me, like we're family. I love him. And I know I could always call him for advice on a case if I was kind of unsure of something. If there was something I haven't seen before and I wanted his opinion, I could call him and he would respond in a second. We're really close like that. He's one of the most trustworthy researchers I've seen out there. I know there's a lot of charlatans, and I know there's all the TV shows and the para celebrities and all this stuff. And although John and I will differ a lot in our theology and our philosophies and the way we do things, but he's a trustworthy guy who helped a lot of people, and I saw it firsthand. And he would give you his arm to help you. So I got to definitely throw a shout out to him because he was instrumental in my coming up through that journey. And when I was leaving to pursue holy orders, and he was very supportive of that, and he's always been like a brother to me in that sense.
Yeah, that's
But
amazing. Definite shout out to him, and he's still an active investigator.
still active. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, he's still doing it all these years later.
You mentioned going to their home, Ed and Lorraine Warren's home, and I don't know if this is real or if it was
Yes,
just for the movie, but there's the Conjuring movies, the Annabelle movie, and they had that room where they had all of essentially the cursed or possessed items. Is that real, or was that
that
real?
is real. So I think it's actually a little spookier in real life than the movie.
Oh
Because
my
in the
gosh.
movie, it's kind of like a room off of on their house, attached to their house. So to get to the Warrens Museum, you go into their house and you go down into their basement, which they call the Halloween room. And it's more like fun stuff, like decorations. I remember when they went to England, they worked on a case and they gave them the police hats. So they have like on a shelf they have the police hats, and it's more like Halloweenish type stuff. And there's a large table, and they used to probably have discussions and things there. Off of there was Lorraine's office, and then there's actually a large wooden door, and you open it and there's a tunnel. It's an outdoor tunnel. It's all covered, and you go through it, and then it kind of I think it jets to the right hand side, and then there's a door, and it used to be an old art studio, and it's detached totally from the house, but that's where they kept all their supposed occult items, like Annabelle, which obviously people probably seen the movie or heard about it. Different things from cases. I remember them. They had the dinosaur from the Conjuring 3 case. There was the dinosaur toy that supposedly walked across the room. They had that in there. They had Ed's office was right off of there as well, so he had all his cassette tapes and like case files and stuff. They had I think a haunted organ, the musical instruments, books, like all the stuff, statues.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it's pretty spooky, and yeah, it's very real. They used to give tours of it. I went on. I've only been in there. It was one time because most of the other times I met in Lorraine's office or upstairs in the living room with Ed, something like that. I wasn't really pushing to go in there. I had enough respect. I
Yeah.
I didn't know what I really felt, but at the same time, I figured there was enough in there where he doesn't like to keep heat or electricity in there because the things fly off the shelves. Um, I was like, yeah, I'm cool. When we discuss the book stuff for the articles, we can do that upstairs. Like, I'm not going to go hang out in the museum.
Oh my gosh. That is unbelievable.
It's
I
very real.
I knew
So
that the Annabelle doll was real because I'd seen pictures, and it was more like a Raggedy Ann doll or something, or Raggedy Andy doll or
yes,
something, right? Yeah, as opposed to what
yeah,
they have in the movie.
the movie makes it look scary. It's
Yeah,
pretty scary looking doll, but no, it's just a regular oversized Raggedy Ann doll
it's
in real
almost scarier
life.
to me that it's a Raggedy Andy doll or whatever, you know.
Exactly.
I do want to ask you before I let you go. You mentioned a couple cases. Is there any of them that really stand out as being just an unbelievable experience?
I think for this one, I've talked before like about some experiences at like an exorcism.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna try something different. I don't know if I've ever talked about this before in a podcast.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
this one, I think, so to me, this was when I was younger. I was, I guess you say, a postulant for holy orders, but I was not a deacon or a priest yet. So I was not in clerical garb like I typically am in a cassock or anything like that. So I was not identifiable as clergy. And I was actually pretty close to my old college, which was Western New England College in Springfield, Massachusetts. I took a ride out there with somebody. We heard there was new buildings, things like that. We wanted to check out the old campus. I was heavily involved in the research end of it then on Warren's cases, John Zaffa's cases, going to exorcisms and assisting the clergy, things like that at this time. But I would not be identified, like I said, as a clergyman. So I remember up past the school there was a cool bookstore. They had a lot of like neat books. Most of it was a Christian bookstore, but they had some neat stuff, and I wanted to stop there after we visited the campus. So we go up there, still there. A couple years later, great. Park the car, go in the store, and I didn't see this happening, by the way, at first. This is what my friend relayed to me. So I start walking into the store, and I knew the section I wanted to go to, which was in the back. And as soon as I walked in the store, I guess a guy kind of turned really sharply and just started staring at me. And as I was walking to the back of the store, I guess he started on the other aisle, also going to the back of the store, trying to look at me the whole way. And when I came to my section, he came around, I believe it was to my left side, all the way around. He was just like staring in my face, like really in my personal space. And I kind of looked over, and I'm a pretty nice guy. Like, yeah, I really have to push my buttons. And I'm like, can I help you? And he goes, you try to get rid of us. And I was like, excuse me? He said, you try to get rid of us. And I was like, oh, okay. Nothing's clicking right now. I'm just kind of like, why is this guy up in my grill? you know? And so I go back to like looking at the books, and he's staring at me, standing in my personal space, probably for another 20 seconds or so. Then he turned around and walked away like nothing happened. And I interpreted it as I was working on all these cases heavily at the time. I was being accepted into a program for holy orders. And I think these things, it's very hierarchical structure. I think they dialogue behind the scenes. The spirit world is not like our world. Something with that man, attached to that man, or use that man, or whatever it was, to let me know who I was. You try to get rid of us, because I try to help people in these cases. So I think it was to maybe spook me a little bit and scare me. And then when I left, the person I was with was like, what the heck was that all about? And I said, I don't know. And they told me how the person like turned and looked at me and was being all crazy and started following me to the back of the store, none of which I saw because I was just going to my section. I didn't see him till he was just right on top of me. So I never really knew for sure, but to me it was pretty creepy. The only thing I've seen like in movies, like for instance, I don't think the Exorcist movie is very scary. I think it's a great psychological thriller. But there is one thing in that movie that scares the crap out of me. And that's when Father Karras is on the subway, and there's the crippled man that says, can you give some spare change to an old altar boy, Father? And he's going through turmoil. I think he avoids the man. He forgets about him. He goes on his way. Later, when he's in front of the possessed little girl, she goes, in the voice of the man, can you spare some change for an altar boy? So the demons, I think Friedkin knew that these things communicate. They're, what I mean? He portrayed that in the film. And I don't think people look at that part. They look at the spinning head, the pea soup, the levitations. To me, that's not that scary because that's so rare to anything like that to really happen. It's very much more mild. I mean, I've seen furniture.
The little
I've seen some of the
subtleties.
stuff.
Yeah, the little subtleties.
The subtleties.
Are what really, yeah. Really
because
get
that's
you.
where, like, yeah, that's because it's almost like they know, they're watching, they communicate, they know you're involved with stuff. So that made me realize how cautious you have to be with this, because I don't know how to explain it beyond the experience itself. I mean, I can try to understand it, but I don't think I can. But it really was something that moved me more so than a lot of the cases.
That's pretty terrifying. Actually, oh my gosh. Oh man. Wow. I often don't go back and watch or listen to my own episodes, but this will be one that I absolutely do because I want to hear all of this again. I could talk to you for hours more. Um, but I want to thank you so much
Oh, of course, brother.
for joining the show, and it's great to see you and really hear some of these stories. And talking about your faith and your love of music, and not just like the scary stuff. It's also interesting, and I think all of
Yeah.
it together paints this fascinating picture of your life.
Yeah, the only reason why I finally, and I had to get permission, of course, to talk about the scary stuff, is
Sure.
not for like the ghost story effect or the scare. It's because this needs to be talked about. Because look at pop culture, and this stuff is glorified. And I get it. It's interesting. People looking for answers, or it's a cool movie, but people need to realize this stuff is very, very real. And if someone listens to this or another podcast and helps one person, it was worth it. If it keeps them out of the occult or gets them the help they need, especially if it leads them to Christ, because that's my ultimate mission. I make no bones about it, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. That's what this is all about. Um, it's all worth doing this type of stuff. I mean, I've had an opportunity. I won't put anybody down, but I've been able to go on to some of the paranormal shows, and most of them I politely declined because they were more about the scares, the story, maybe exploiting the family, and I won't do it. That's not. It's crazy. This is real stuff, and there's people that are in jeopardy. It's about helping them. It's not about exploiting them or the scares. So I'm very, very selective in these things because most of what I've seen, unfortunately, it's not about the people or the work or understanding it. It's more about, I guess, the views, which is sad.
Yeah, I mean, and just knowing you, I'm not surprised that you would turn that down with somebody that would glorify somebody's unfortunate situation. So kudos to you for that. And and I think if people hearing a priest say, "Do not mess with this," if that's not enough, then I don't know what is. And hearing you say that through God is the way that you can essentially beat one of these awful situations if you find yourself in it. I hope that does bring people to the church. You know, I, I can only imagine that all the people that think that these experiences and these ghost hunts are fun, if they had any idea what it was really like, they would not mess with it anymore. That's what I gather
And
from talking to you.
and that's just it. Like, I've been on that side of the fence, so I sympathize and I get the curiosity factor. I get if you encounter something and it feels amazing and you want to learn more about that encounter. So I'm not condemning anybody. I get it. I was there. And I think that's what adds credence to my statement is that I've been on that side of the fence, as I mentioned before. And so I'm saying it from also a research perspective. Just leave it alone. It's not worth it. It's really
Yeah.
not. I think psychologically first and foremost, and then certainly spiritually as well. Um, I can get really mess people up and also lead them to perdition. So it's just stay away, man. That's all I can say.
Stay away.
Just stay
Stay
away.
away, man. You're truly one of the most interesting and fascinating people that I know and that I've had a chance to talk to. So I really appreciate this time. And this is my first two-parter that we have
Oh,
here. This is
nice.
gonna, so this is awesome. Father Maximus McIntyre, thank you so much, my friend. It's been an absolute pleasure. This has been the first ever two-part episode of Sound Out. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, friends.